I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the most haunted city on earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And I'm JT with stains on my shirt because I spilled coffee.
Coffee stains.
Coffee stains. It's okay.
Ghostly coffee stains.
Yes.
Ooh.
Only YouTube will be able to see that. But,
Yep.
you know.
They will ridicule
You're just
me.
listening at the podcast. He's covered in coffee.
So
From
much
head
coffee.
to toe coffee.
We dumped so much coffee on him. But other than JT's coffee stains, today we are going to be talking about the curse of the Poltergeist film series. Ooh. But before we get into that, though, we are so close to getting to 100 Parajunkies over on Patreon, and we have decided...
By the time this airs, we might actually be past 100. So if they come and look,
Okay.
just a
All right. Well,
disclaimer.
Okay,
Yes,
disclaimer.
we are front loading some of our episodes. So
Yeah, we're all going places.
Well, we're going out of town to shoot Parajunkie exclusives.
Yep, in
That's what
North
we're
Carolina. We will finally talk about the Moon-Eyed people.
moon-eyed people. The moon pie people are my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
I love moon pies.
Moon pie
Oh my god.
Yes, and we'll be talking about
Pie.
we're gonna take the Parajunkies to this really cool small cemetery
That we found, yeah.
on Bearwalla Mountain. It's right next to the mountain house.
It's so
And
creepy.
oh yeah, and then finally Helen's Bridge.
Yes.
Finally Helen's Bridge.
And we'll discuss too the curse that I think is happening on Bearwalla Mountain right now. We've discussed this.
Yeah.
I think the land spirits are very annoyed with Airbnb and
sure.
Verbo right now.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. So if you want to hear more about Bearwalla Mountain's land spirits being pissed off, what?
They can't hear it, but
Okay.
it's just a bunch of clicking back there from the.
It's also a dragging sound
Oh yeah.
right there,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like in front of that chifferobe. I just like to say chifferobe.
Yeah,
It's a fun word.
The ghosts have
Chifferobe.
been very active in the space today, so you know they're very.
All right, just ignore it.
Okay.
Just ignore it.
We are a ghost podcast.
Yeah.
Ignore the ghost. Let's talk about this movie.
But anyways, so so if you want to hear more about that or you want to see those episodes, make sure to join us over on Patreon. But
Yeah.
anywho, getting into the curse.
The curse.
The curse.
It's really bizarre, y'all. Like
There's so many really strange occurrences around the Poltergeist movies, and it's just bizarre because I think the first time that it was ever brought up to me was before before Carol Ann passed away.
Right.
Well, people were talking about it that early on.
right.
They were literally like,
Interesting.
"Oh, did you know that this happened? Did you know that this happened?"
Right.
Because the big one. Oh well, I'm
yeah.
jumping ahead.
Okay. So hold on. If you guys have not seen any of the Poltergeist movies, because the curse kind of extends all throughout the series
It does,
of the franchise. But to kind of give you a lowdown on what the first movie really is about, the film was released in 1982. It was directed by Tobe Hooper, and it was produced by Steven Spielberg. So. Big time movie. If you haven't seen it, where have you been?
Yeah, it is one of the best supernatural
Absolutely.
movies out there.
And
I close the doors because they're here.
they're here.
Okay.
But it was an instant success, and it was considered a masterpiece in American horror cinema.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. It really is. It's so well done.
It's on the level of masterpiece, like with The Exorcist, in my opinion.
It was
it's not as scary as The Exorcist, obviously, but it's up there.
fun, though.
Well, it was so fully produced. Was
yeah.
the thing. It had a heightened sense of production that
Yeah,
you didn't see before in horror movies and supernatural horror movies. Because before that you would get these movies. Even The Exorcist was contained, and they did some amazing effects, but they pulled out the stops with
They really
Poltergeist. And there's a because ghost stories of that era, of that period, were very muted, and like The Ghost Story or Changeling, or these almost dramas. It's like very close up look at a person's face while he hears a distant sound.
Right.
What is that distant sound? But this was like in your face. You're like, oh no, was not prepared.
Ooh, and also just side note, before we get into this, if you like The Exorcist, go ahead and watch a movie that recently came out called The Exorcism of God.
Yeah.
You've seen it? You saw it?
It's
so good.
It's so good. It's very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. One of the best exorcism movies I've seen come out in a long, long
And there is
time.
an exorcism movie coming out in theaters, The Pope's Exorcist.
Yeah.
Which is based on true accounts.
Not a sponsor, but I wish they were.
Yeah. So but the reason why I say if you like The Exorcist, that director was heavily influenced by The Exorcist,
absolutely,
and
yeah.
you can
Yeah,
tell.
Oh,
can
you
see
could
it.
definitely tell
Yeah.
from the
very beginning.
Yeah, from the very beginning. I did a little bit of research on that. It was actually only made for like 1.2 million, which I mean the amount of production was unbelievable for that. So they stretched that. They shot it in Mexico and Venezuela.
Yep.
And it was just unbelievable. I mean, it was really fun, and I loved all of they focused heavily on the religious imagery, which made it even scarier, especially if you are a religious person. So it was a dope film. Not a sponsor, but wish they were.
Right. So diving back into the synopsis, essentially. So the film focuses on the Freelings, who have a home in California that starts to become plagued with a number of paranormal and aggressive type ghostly activity. And their daughter, Carol Ann, is abducted through her bedroom closet by a group of ghosts who are under the control of a monster demon called the Beast.
The Beats.
So that's the gist of what you need to know. Basically,
Absolutely.
If you haven't seen the Poltergeist, go watch it. It's so good.
And they really touch upon so many amazing paranormal investigatory tropes.
Oh yeah.
And there's even a character that was modeled after Lorraine Warren.
Yeah.
In the movie.
Right.
Yep.
And famously, everyone knows the go to the light, Carol Ann. She's got that
Yeah,
really
go to
weird
the
Southern
light.
accent. But there's a lot of amazing research that went into it, because it was just putting story upon story upon story, all of which we've heard and became very trope. Houses built on cemeteries, Native American land, blah blah blah. So many of them that you're just like, wow, they really congealed so
Everything.
many stories into this, and it was kind of I want to say for the 30th anniversary, they were making a documentary, and there was talk about Savannah in there, formerly Calhoun Square, being a bunch of hooses that they believed were built on top of graves.
Sure.
Right.
And so that whole story, they were like, this is a common story. This is the kind of story that Tobe Hooper sought out. That So yeah.
So the curse basically, it was the majority of it was fueled with the idea that there was a curse bestowed upon the cast, and because of things that would happen on the set. But there were multiple deaths of cast members. In total, 4 cast members would die, and we'll go into each of their deaths. But 2 of these deaths, though, were very unexpected and very confusing, which made fans really start to go down this rabbit hole of this kind of conspiracy theory of a curse. The first death would be Heather O'Rourke. Rook is O'Rourke?
O'Rourke. I thought
O'Rourke.
Well, she played Carol Ann Freeling, who was obviously the focal point of the series, and she was only 6 years old when the first Poltergeist film was released. So she was misdiagnosed with Crohn's disease in 1987, but the following year, O'Rourke fell ill again, and her symptoms were kind of just dismissed as being the flu. And so they let her go on, but a day later, she collapsed and suffered cardiac arrest.
Little girl.
She was 12 years old.
Oh, poor thing.
And
it was during the filming of the third Poltergeist movie.
Yeah.
I mean, they literally finished the movie post her death. So there were stand-ins and doubles and things like that.
Exactly. And so after she was airlifted to a children's hospital in San Diego, she died during an operation to correct a bowel obstruction, and it was later believed that she had been suffering from a congenital intestinal abnormality. So, again, very bizarre because those are not typically things that you see in a 12-year-old girl.
No.
And so that was just one of the first really weird deaths.
So bizarrely, in the first movie, if you watch the first movie, there's an older sister. Mm-hmm. She was not in the second movie or the third movie because she was brutally murdered.
Yes, she was. Yeah.
After the first movie, so she was technically the first death among the cast that they talk about, because I want to say there's some crew members that they talk about.
Yeah.
But I distinctly recall she was like strangled by her boyfriend.
Yes, actually, we can talk about that now.
All right.
Dominique Dunne.
Yep.
Now. Dominique Dunne, like Chris said, played the older sister Dana Freeling, and she would die in 1982. So literally right after.
Like after the premiere.
Yeah. So Dunne had recently separated from her boyfriend John Sweeney, and in November of that year, he showed up at her house pleading for her to take him back. Well, she refused, and Sweeney grabbed Dunne's neck, choked her until she was unconscious, and left her to die in her Hollywood home's driveway. Mm-hmm. And Sweeney was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. But
what?
Yeah.
6.5?
Yeah, and he was released after 3 years and 7 months.
For a murder?
Yeah.
What?
Yes.
Doesn't California have like the death penalty and stuff?
Not at that time.
I think a lot of it
Not at that
It's
time.
after 76, which is when it was federally
but I think
reinstated.
Well, you got to remember it was.
Oh.
You got to remember it's the 80s. It was a lot harder to pin a murder without any kind of witnesses or things like that. So
I mean, it sounds like we know what happened.
Right.
That he left her alive, it was probably his conceit
That's
that he
true.
thought that she was fine. So it would probably become involuntary manslaughter or, an accident.
Not in Florida or Georgia.
No.
That boy would be gone.
Florida and Georgia, you could have hunted him down in the streets.
Yes. But
The police would have give you a high five.
So that was the other death, particularly
Jeez.
that was just really bizarre.
It kind of sparked the whole curse.
Right.
Because, like I said, before the third Poltergeist movie, there was already talk of the curse. There was already talk of, isn't it weird that these people died?
Mm-hmm.
These cast members died, and so many issues came up with producing the show. Movies.
It's wild. And there were actually 2 other cast members who would die. Now, these deaths, I will say, they were not as mysterious or unexpected. But they were still unfortunate. So don't get me wrong. It's still very sad that they passed, but it's not as shocking as a 12-year-old girl dying from cardiac arrest.
Yes.
Basically.
Right.
So one of those people would be the preacher, Kane, the evil preacher, Kane, from Poltergeist 2, who was played by Julian Beck. In 1983, Beck had been diagnosed with stomach cancer, which he ended up passing away from soon after he finished work on the second installment of the series. And then the other person who would pass away also died from after the second film, which was Will Sampson, who played Taylor, the Native American shaman. And he died after undergoing a heart-lung transplant. heart and lung transplant, which had been had a very slim survival rate.
Right.
But interestingly, with Samson, I will note the thing that made his death even weirder was because right after the second film had wrapped, Will Sampson actually performed an authentic exorcism literally right after the film wrapped. So, and then he died. So that was kind of like what made his death particularly really freaking weird.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, there are some other weird things that would happen on set that weren't exactly death related.
Yeah.
But basically, Jo Beth Williams, who played the mom, she claimed that in the first two films that Steven Spielberg insisted on using actual human skeletons as props.
Did he really?
Yeah, in an attempt to save money because they were cheaper.
They were cheaper. It is common practice if you see a skeleton in like 60s, 70s, and 80s movies, they were skeletons. They were, human skeletons, human remains, because these are things that, it was more expensive to make and cast and have a fake skeleton than it was to have, to take from the prop closet.
That's like a desecration.
Well, what's even weirder is because the scene in question is she falls into the swimming pool and there are all these bodies.
Yeah.
Those are skeletons that they also reattached flesh to. they hung vestiges of life. Oh yeah. And
those were like real,
those were real people. Yeah. Skeletons. And Jo Beth says she did not know that until after that scene had been shot. She didn't know that she was in a pool full of actual human remains.
So
there's like no consent there.
Yeah.
Well,
about putting someone in a pool with human remains, and then they're desecrating humans.
Whenever you are treating a skeleton, you are donating your remains to become a study aid, to become something. So yeah, there is consent because you sign off. They don't just take bodies and say, let's turn this into a skeleton. You have donated your body to that.
But specifically to be shown in a horror film?
Well,
because these skeletons end up in property, in prop warehouses and things of that nature after being used in universities and things like that. So
that's disturbing.
It is disturbing.
That's disturbing.
That's one of the reasons why some people think that the curse was really a thing. I don't think it's necessarily that even though that is very dark and very macabre, but I don't know what exactly would have spurred the curse. But
I don't know. Maybe they were using human remains.
Well, I don't think that.
But that was in like the second film or whatever.
No, that was the first film.
Oh,
remember she goes into that pool in the very first film.
Cool. Yep.
But that was pretty common practice in horror movies. They weren't using rubber skeletons. They weren't using. It was not uncommon. When you deal with volumes, when you have a big gigantic stack of them, like if it's a single skeleton, there's probably a good chance that you're looking at a rubber or plaster. Sure. However. It does kind of shine the light on awareness on groups of people paying attention to a story that you're telling, and that story being very closely related to events and things and ideas. I'm pretty sure we've said this before. There's a notion of which came first, the ghost or the ghost story. If you get a bunch of people on board to create a story, and that story is very closely aligned to things that people believe, and you're altering people's understanding of how the paranormal works, and you've got crew members, and you've got cast members, and they're all now being introduced to the ideas of ghosts and the ideas of how ghosts might go on and how things might happen, and you're doing due diligent work to find stories that people tell and legends that people uphold and things like that. All of a sudden, you are cementing a ghost story. And so when you get a bunch of people together and you have them like really dedicated to that idea, because I think you'll hear this with numerous stories, like even The Exorcist has stories about, cast members and people on set having instances, and because they have delved into something that either was new to them or at the very least that they concentrated very hard on. We talk about intent all the time.
Yeah.
And when you deal with intent, when you start to really think about what does that mean when you get hundreds of people involved in telling a single ghost story, you kind of condense it all into this notion that there's a demon chasing you, that there's, and that in a way works the way that seances work, and works the way that the Ouija board works, and works the way you've brought a bunch of people to collectively think about this scary system and the scary series, and maybe there's a door that opens there, maybe there's a thing that goes there, and I do not put it past, because I don't have any reports of it. I don't know that it happened, but I would not put it past people involved in it getting involved in Ouija and getting involved in seances and doing these things as a part of their artistic preparatory, atmosphere.
I'm gonna just say that I think it's the remains.
I don't know.
I think it's the remains. That's a lot of those people are not giving consent to be in a film. Okay, sure, to like teach people about bones, but that's way different than being in a paranormal horror film. I mean, I'm a filmmaker myself. I just wouldn't use real people.
That's fair.
I wouldn't do it.
And a lot of people do think that is the key.
Gotta have the budget.
It's just one of those things that, because of commonality, we make it sound terrifying.
Yeah,
being a common practice and being something that probably was not, because people think that they went down to the graveyard and they pulled bodies out and threw them in the pool. No, these were prop skeletons. They just happened to be formerly human.
Imagine how haunted those warehouses must be.
Absolutely.
It's
so peculiar. Well, and that's another thing, because when I went to massage therapy school. And when we were in massage therapy school, we had to learn muscles and how they work. And there's a whole line of videos where they had cadavers. And they literally peeled them apart and muscle by muscle showed how the muscles worked, where they inserted and all these things. And I couldn't help but wonder, you donate your body and then you're on display as a corpse, and then they're peeling you layer by layer to show all these things. And it's like, there was a very visceral response to the idea that that's a person.
Yeah.
Or have you ever seen the Bodies exhibit?
The Bodies exhibit.
So the Bodies exhibit is an exhibit, I think it originated in China, but it's basically human beings. These are all human beings, and they're peeled. And they're, you see them
something like that in Edinburgh.
Yeah, the Surgeon's Museum.
Layer by layer down to, they'll have the entire nervous system, up, and it's like, that was a human being. What I'm looking at.
And that sounds good. That sounds normal.
That sounds normal.
That sounds normal. Using a body for a movie does not sound normal.
Those people are on display in museums. They are not.
They did. That's informational versus entertainment.
Oh, and
your
prisoners.
death is entertainment.
They were prisoners.
Yes.
Okay. Most of those bodies were prisoners.
Okay. Wait, in the movie or the?
No.
Okay, gotcha.
In the
bodies. Okay, gotcha.
And the Surgeon's Museum that JT's referring to is in Edinburgh. It's a horrific museum, like very unassumingly horrifying museum. We went there to see the Burke and Hare stuff, because
they have the real stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, they have the book bound in human skin, and then if you go to the National Scotland Museum, then they had the Burke and Hare dolls, which is very fascinating. But regardless, JT was so freaked out by this museum, because they literally, from floor to ceiling, have jars of tumors and brains and just
you don't want to, there's things we shouldn't look at.
Right.
Unless you're a medical professional, I don't want to see these things.
Oh my gosh. Like, there's literally a cancer room. I kid you not.
There's a cancer room?
There was a cancer room, and they're like, this is all the cancer that's been cut out of people. And I'm like, okay. And, that's the type of stuff that I'm like, there is no way there's not some hauntings in this building.
Oh, yeah.
From, those bits of people that are just preserved and put out on display. Same kind of concept.
No, for sure.
But yeah,
for sure.
Back to the Poltergeist. So,
back to Poltergeist.
It's interesting that all of this would happen to mostly the family members of sorts, which is intriguing, because they're the focal points. They could have maybe by whatever entities that are, if you're going on the theory that an entity might have been brought out through the process of these filmings and whatnot, if it might have attacked the family members because they were the core focus of the films.
Because that's how the story goes.
Exactly.
Because the story was these people were living in the house and they are the haunted.
Right.
And to include the two that weren't family members, one was the perpetrator.
Right.
He was he was like a cult leader, the character, and the other was the one fighting, protecting. So they were locked in combat, and those two died. The two that were representing the good and the evil of the story both passed very close to each other too, like time wise.
They did, which is so strange.
Not abnormal because the preacher man, I think he was cast because he looked like a walking corpse. He looked very skeletal and very, and he was very old. So, hearing that he had passed was not like, but he was so young. It was like, no. I absolutely understand that. But still, when you take into consideration the whole picture,
right? It's just weird occurrence after weird occurrence, and it makes you wonder. Even like you were saying, if they had some of the crew members or cast members might have been dabbling into various other occult things,
or at least entertaining those ideas, sitting there and on your coffee break being like, hey, have you ever done? Oh, well, I'm interested. Just that chatter, of trying to create a realistic. Because some of the things that they showed in that movie, spoiler alert, there is a scene in which a man goes into the bathroom and he starts picking at his face. The ensuing scene was one of the most visceral things I'd seen. I was young. I was 10, I think, when I saw it. And it damaged me. It's a damaging scene. I was like, this is PG?
Was it really PG?
Yeah, it's a PG film.
No wonder my parents were like, yeah, you can watch
well,
that.
That's just it. It was definitely one of those things because it had a lot of comedy to it.
Yeah.
There was kind of a lighthearted, there was a heroic end to it all in a way.
Jaws was PG.
Yeah, that can't be true.
It's true.
That's insane.
That doesn't feel right.
Y'all.
Motion Picture Academy, or no, Motion Picture.
Whatever.
The MPAA.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah, because I remember going to Blockbuster and I'm like, I want this one. And then my parents were like, okay.
Oh,
and it was just.
I don't like clowns. I don't like dolls. I don't like clown dolls.
I know. I figured. I figured that's down at the bottom.
What?
Yeah, I believe it's because it didn't have PG-13, so it wasn't R.
Oh.
So they're like, well, if it's not R, it's PG.
Oof, that's crazy. I would never have guessed that because there are some truly gruesome things in that movie.
There's such gruesome things.
Yeah,
and there's nudity.
Yes.
Well, at the beginning is naked.
Oh, yeah, she is, isn't she?
There was a time,
R.
I guess, when PG included nudity.
I guess so. But, it's also intriguing that this film would come out during kind of the height of the occult movement, the Satanism movement.
The Satanic Panic. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I wonder if a part of that didn't have, some elements of it.
One of the interesting things about it is because it stood as a almost propaganda for fighting evil. Propaganda.
Right.
He's saying there are evil spirits, there's a demon, and fight the demon. It's not nearly as glorifying as people would assume these movies could be, or influential in that sense.
Sure.
Because in the end, I think you wanted to be the heroes of that story. Which we kind of lost in a lot of horror movies for a long time. And the 80s was very bad at this. They became more and more villain-centric. Because there was a time when horror movies were about the survivors, and then they became about the killers. All of a sudden, your Jason Voorhees, your Michael Myers, your Freddy Kruegers. Yep. They were the reason you went. You went to watch the killers and how cleverly they kill, or and you didn't care if they were beaten. And generally, you would be disappointed if they're beaten, because then that means there's not a Nightmare on Elm Street 6, and that becomes like an interesting thing. Was this was right at the iceberg tip?
Yeah.
And Tobe Hooper, of course, famous for Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yep.
Which he came on the scene with one of the most viscerally disturbing movies of the time, and possibly of all time. There were moments in that movie that you can't shake. And then he came on to Poltergeist, which was kind of a family, romp, really.
I mean,
certainly by comparison.
Wow,
But
that tree is horrifying.
Yeah, the
Tree is
tree was
horrifying.
great.
Yeah.
Tree was great.
Tree was
What
horrifying.
what else happened on set? Was there anything else creepy that happened on set, or was that it?
I mean, that was about what I found.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha.
So I can remember stories about like having power issues, just those classic,
Sure.
crew members reporting strange things occurring, things
Right.
moving, things not being where they left them, stuff like
Okay.
that, which becomes kind of classically the kind of stories that propagate when you have a ghost. It's like this is haunted. Oh well, I heard so and so. I heard that they had a crane that got stuck and it hit a live wire or something. Blah blah blah. So you do hear a lot of stories, but the irrefutable ones are these 4 deaths
Right.
The 4 deaths, yeah.
in a relatively short span of time, between in a 6-year period of time. Major cast members of this franchise died. And the weirdest one being the focal cast member,
Right.
being a 6-year-old child. The focal cast member dies telling stories about ghosts and telling stories about, and you have to wonder how what her career path would have been,
Right.
Because she was basically a Drew Barrymore shoulder to shoulder. I want to say that.
Yeah, like E.T., like that.
Yeah.
Well, Drew Barrymore and the E.T.
Yeah.
I think Drew Barrymore might have been younger, but
She was a baby scream queen.
she was a baby scream queen, because
Yeah.
I want to say wasn't she in another horror film?
Who?
The little girl
Oh.
in that period? Am I thinking wrong? Now, I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, look it up.
Computer.
The
Pocket computer.
well, also another side interesting note to make about this. Interesting choice in calling it Poltergeist, because everything they show is literally the exact opposite of what a poltergeist is.
Right, which led to
Wait, really? I thought a poltergeist was an evil entity.
No, it's a noisy ghost.
Noisy ghost. It's a
Noisy
ghost.
ghost.
That's literally what it means.
So what?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
So whatever's in the room's a poltergeist?
I
mean, we're hearing it.
Yeah,
Possibly.
possibly. Usually it's without intent. It's the thing that goes bump in the night.
Oh, so okay. Then I got a question. For something to be a poltergeist, what if it knocks a mason jar off the counter? Is that a poltergeist?
Well,
It doesn't have to scream.
It can,
but I mean
it can be.
like a
It's so
cat.
poltergeists are spirits that predominantly just cause noise. Like they are the ones that are opening and closing your cabinets, and they're the ones that are knocking things off consistently, or they're knocking on walls, they're stomping on floors,
Okay.
whatever. That is not to say that everything that knocks something off your table
Yeah.
is a poltergeist, because that's some ghosts, that's their first way of trying to communicate, is knocking something over, because it's an easier way to communicate.
Okay.
Yes.
But it doesn't necessarily mean immediately, oh, poltergeist,
Right. Usually you would you would affix poltergeist activity to annoyance.
Yeah.
Something that annoys you. Something that unexplainable, annoying. Once it starts moving into intelligent territory, it moves away from being a poltergeist by definition. Once you start getting entities, once you start seeing it, because that's a big thing, is you generally don't see a poltergeist. Poltergeist, open cabinets and move things, and you hear things crunch and stuff like that. It's just, and some people would say it's just energy, like a wave of energy that rolls through and disrupts things.
Right.
All right. So basically, what are y'all's opinions on the curse? Because if it is a curse, well, then it's like a very, very violent curse. I mean, you're talking about something that murdered 4 people. So what do y'all think? Do you think it's just happenstance, or do you think just as pros, what do you think?
It's tricky. I mean, I'm not going to negate, and I am definitely not the person to sit here on my high horse and be like, there's no curse. But, it's, I don't lean towards curse. Because all of these deaths, even though it's really bizarre that they would all happen in this 6-year period, can still be explained because, the older sister, she had a boyfriend she was trying to get rid of. Obviously, there was some type of volatile relationship there. It's unfortunate, but it's not out of the ordinary that sometimes people are like, if I can't have you, no one can have you, basically.
Right.
And then with the little girl, even though it's very rare for a child to die in that way, she had a history of chronic illness.
Right.
Beforehand.
Because they had misdiagnosed her with Crohn's disease, which means that she had something else that was going on clearly, but they just didn't properly diagnose her. And that is probably because she was a 6-year-old child. And
you wouldn't expect, that kind of
those types of problems in a child of that nature. And we don't know her whole medical history. And then the 2 later ones, like I said at the beginning, though they are sad, they are both not unexpected.
Right.
Because the heart and lung transplant, that already had a very slim survival rate. And then the other guy, he had cancer. So, I mean, it's not...
Okay.
So it's
probably not a curse.
It's a retroactive curse.
Right.
Meaning, when you compile it together and you look at it, you can claim the curse as a series of very bad events that all seem to be around the production of this series of films. And that, in a way, is just coming up with a word for the level of misfortune that fell upon the group of creators that made these movies.
I think people just want to continue the horror. They love the movie and all of that, and then calling it a curse is but I think for a lot of people, calling it a curse is probably pretty exciting.
Yes, absolutely, and that's the thing. When you hindsight, it's a curse when you're looking back at it as a package deal. But I don't think it's because of some ill intent or some supernatural force. But it is
just weird.
A very tightly knit series of unfortunate events.
Well, and it's not the first movie to be called cursed.
Certainly not.
What was that film that's called like the most cursed film?
It's the one that starts with an A. We brought it up before. It's the
Animalia?
Yeah. It's like hold on. And it's something like a nerve.
Because it like
Anteater.
Like multiple people died after seeing the movie, right? That was the story.
But that's a separate episode.
But that's worth a deep dive because I think it was just good marketing.
Right. Well, I'm still scared to watch it. I've never seen it because I'm like, I'm not taking that risk.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, Antrim.
Yeah, I'm not taking the risk of watching it, but
nothing will ever match the Blair Witch Project's, brilliant viral campaigning before virality was a thing.
Right.
Literally hiding the cast and doing all these things, building it up to be documentary, found footage. And there is so much to be said about the engine surrounding trying to make a scary movie scarier by bringing it into your life, by bringing it into your home and bringing it into, the danger, which I think is probably where found footage really got its start. Was it looks like I could be a part of it, that this could happen to me.
Sure.
So when you do those fake documentary style, there's one Wolf Lake, which is an Australian horror film. think it's called Wolf Lake.
Oh
which
yeah.
Which is
no.
is
I know
it-
exactly what you're talking about. It's the serial killer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we watched that.
it. We watched
Yeah.
it.
Brilliantly done. Not real.
Yeah.
But as you're watching it, you have no issue like giving way because it was done very well. It was so well constructed that you're like, this feels real. This has that sensibility because we've come to a place where we recognize documentary style. And so if you can make something look documentary, you have room to really mess with people's brains.
Oh yeah.
It is very true.
So I think the consensus is that Poltergeist is probably not cursed. Probably
It's just a
Series
lot
of
of terrible things. A series of unfortunate events.
Yeah.
I need to do some more research on the murder of that girl because I feel like 6.5 years isn't enough. That's crazy, huh?
It is
Yeah.
crazy, and like I said, there might be something to the idea that she didn't die in his hands. He caused her death, but it was not the intent to kill her. It was not the
Or
Sucks to suck, bro.
Or he had good lawyers who could.
Yeah, really good lawyers.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So.
Jeez.
Yeah, you can do a deep dive into true crime, but it's in sentencing. So this. It's depending on how good your lawyer is. If you got a plea deal, you can there's so many variables of why you get certain amounts of time, and even if you did kill your girlfriend, but it's the justice system. So
It's true. It's true.
Um,
Gotta love Poltergeist.
But it's
how
a
many
multi-
are there?
Three.
And
There's three.
Heather
Well, yeah.
O'Rourke was only in 3 movies.
Yeah.
And it was Poltergeist 1, 2, and 3.
No way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She made television appearances. She was in like an episode of Webster, or she
Yeah.
was around. But as far as films, only the 3 Poltergeist movies
Yeah, because she died during the
production of
the third one.
the third one.
So
All right.
there you
Heard
go.
that.
So go watch Poltergeist. It's a fun movie.
It is a fun movie,
And now you know that
and it has some pretty iconic scares.
it does. And now you know about the human remains in the pool. So there you go.
When you see the skeletons pop up in the pool,
Just know it's real.
they're peoples,
But
former peoples.
former peoples. But thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.